What if I told you the six-pack you want is only 24 pounds away, but almost everyone gets the math wrong from day one? Meet Joe, 200 pounds, 25% body fat, fully committed to changing his body for the very first time in his life. Every fitness influencer online will tell Joe he can see his abs in 4 weeks flat, and every single one of them is lying to him. Today, we're going to do something nobody on social media wants to do. We're going to show you the real math. Before we can even talk about timelines, we need to understand what Joe's 200 pounds is actually made of. His body isn't just one number on a scale. It's split into two very different categories entirely. There's fat mass, and there's everything else, called fat-free mass, and that distinction changes everything about his plan. At 25% body fat, exactly 50 pounds of Joe's weight is stored fat sitting on his frame. Subtract that 50 pounds from his total, and Joe is left with roughly 150 pounds of fat-free mass. That number includes his muscle, his bones, his organs, his water, and every tissue that isn't stored fat. It does not mean Joe should ever try to weigh 150 pounds on the scale. That would technically mean 0% body fat, a number that is not compatible with being alive. Instead, this hidden number becomes the foundation for calculating exactly what Joe should weigh once he's lean. But here's the catch almost nobody talks about before starting a serious fat loss journey. This entire calculation only works if Joe protects his muscle throughout the entire process. If he starves himself, does endless cardio, and skips his protein, muscle disappears too. And if muscle disappears alongside the fat, his target weight becomes completely meaningless by the end. He could hit the number on the scale and still not have the body he pictured, because losing weight and losing fat are two completely different outcomes hiding behind one single number. So, assuming Joe protects that 150 pounds of lean tissue, what should his final number be? At 15% body fat, that lean mass now represents 85% of his entire body weight total. Divide 150 by 0.85 and you get his real target weight. That number comes out to approximately 176 pounds, not the fantasy number Instagram keeps selling everyone. Which means Joe needs to lose about 24 pounds, but only if that weight comes from fat. If a chunk of those 24 pounds comes from muscle instead, the mirror will lie to him. He'll weigh 176 pounds and still see softness where he expected definition and sharp lines. And here's something even more frustrating that nobody warns beginners about before they start. 15% body fat does not look the same on every single person who reaches it. Genetics, muscle shape, fat distribution, and even hydration completely change how lean someone actually appears. So 176 pounds is a smart estimate, never a guaranteed finish line for Joe. The real target was never the number, it was always protecting the muscle underneath it. Now we know exactly what Joe needs to lose, but how fast can this actually happen? The honest answer will disappoint anyone hoping for a miracle transformation in 30 days. At a realistic pace of 1 to 1.5 pounds weekly, sustainable and healthy, this takes time. 24 pounds divided into that pace gives Joe 16 to 24 weeks total. That's 4 to 5.5 months of consistent effort, not 4 weeks of hype. Joe might drop weight fast during week 1 and it will feel incredible on the scale, but that early drop is mostly water, stored carbs, and food still sitting in his digestive system. It is not 20 pounds of pure fat disappearing overnight like influencers claim it does. As the weeks continue, his progress will naturally slow down, and that is completely normal. His body gets lighter, burns fewer calories, and hunger starts creeping in more aggressively than before. This is exactly the point where most people panic and think their metabolism is broken. It isn't broken, it's adapting, and that adaptation is a predictable part of any real fat loss journey. If Joe panics and slashes his calories even further, his training performance will start collapsing fast. Recovery suffers, strength drops, and more of his results start coming from muscle instead of fat. He might reach 176 pounds quickly, but arrive there looking soft, tired, and disappointed. 16 to 24 weeks isn't a punishment. It's actually the reward for doing this correctly. It's the window that lets Joe lose fat while keeping the physique he's building underneath it. But this timeline only holds if his training, sleep, and protein intake stay consistent throughout. The biggest mistake Joe could ever make is assuming every single pound lost equals fat lost. A scale cannot tell the difference between fat, muscle, water, and undigested food sitting inside him. If Joe crash diets, skips protein, and does cardio every single day without resistance training, disaster follows. The scale will drop fast, but a dangerous portion of that drop comes from his hard-earned muscle. Instead of reaching 176 pounds looking sharp, he arrives there looking smaller and weaker instead. His lean mass has shrunk, which means his real target weight might now sit closer to 170 pounds. To avoid this trap entirely, Joe needs exactly 3 non-negotiable foundations built into his plan immediately. First, consistent protein spread across multiple meals throughout his entire day, without exception or excuse. Second, resistance training that challenges his muscles regularly, even during a calorie deficit, without missing sessions. Third, real sleep and recovery, because poor sleep quietly sabotages hunger, workout quality, and long-term consistency. A moderate deficit beats an aggressive one every single time, because moderate deficits are actually sustainable long-term. The goal was never to make the scale crash as fast as humanly possible. The real goal is making sure most of that weight loss comes directly from stored fat. But here's a twist that could completely change Joe's entire timeline in his favor. Because Joe is a true beginner, his body has an advantage most experienced lifters no longer have. He can build muscle and lose fat at the exact same time, a rare combination. This is called body recomposition, and it can transform how Joe looks before the scale even moves. If Joe builds muscle while losing fat, his lean mass actually increases throughout the process, which means his true target weight shifts upward, maybe to 178 or even 180 pounds. He could look leaner, more muscular, and closer to his goal at a heavier number entirely. To make this happen, Joe needs a moderate deficit, not a starvation-level crash diet destroying his results. Enough energy to train hard, recover properly, and consistently push his muscles with progressive overload. Progressive overload simply means gradually increasing weight, reps, or difficulty so his body keeps building muscle. It tells his body that muscle is still needed even while calories are slightly restricted daily. But body recomposition creates a confusing problem that trips up almost every single beginner attempting it. Some weeks, Joe's weight barely moves, even though his waist is visibly shrinking week by week. If he only trusts the scale, he'll panic and assume the entire plan has completely stopped working. That's exactly why Joe needs to track his waist, his photos, his strength, and how clothes fit. 2 men can weigh exactly the same number and look completely different because muscle-to-fat ratios vary wildly.
Joe shouldn't rush to become lighter. His real mission is becoming leaner and stronger simultaneously instead. But even a flawless plan collapses instantly if Joe's starting body fat number was wrong. And this is where most transformations quietly fail before the actual diet even begins properly. Joe assumes he's at 25% because a smart scale or gym machine told him so. But these tools lie constantly, influenced by hydration, sodium, recent workouts, and even the time of day. In reality, someone who believes they're at 25% might actually be closer to 30%. That 5% difference sounds tiny, but it can add 10 extra pounds and several extra months. Even DEXA scans, considered the gold standard, aren't perfectly accurate every single time you use them. The solution isn't chasing one perfect number, it's combining multiple signals into one honest picture. Weekly average weight, waist circumference, consistent progress photos, clothing fit, and gym performance together. Track the trend, not the single reading, because trends reveal truth that one snapshot never can. If his waist keeps shrinking and his strength stays stable, he's losing fat regardless of what machines say. An honest starting estimate might feel discouraging today, but it protects Joe from crushing disappointment later. Believing this takes 4 months when it actually needs 7 is the fastest way to quit. So let's say Joe's original estimate was wrong, and he's actually starting at 30%. That 5% difference completely rewrites his entire journey, his timeline, and his final target number. At 30% body fat, Joe is carrying roughly 60 pounds of stored fat on him. Subtract that from 200, and his estimated fat-free mass drops down to 140 pounds. Divide that by 0.85, and his new target becomes approximately 165 pounds. Joe doesn't need to lose 24 pounds anymore. He now needs to lose 35 pounds total. That's 11 extra pounds beyond his original estimate, adding roughly 2 more months onto his journey. And because fat loss naturally slows as someone gets leaner, the real timeline could stretch even longer. This is exactly where most people lose all motivation and consider quitting entirely on themselves. They reach the weight they originally believed would reveal their abs, and nothing has changed visually. They assume the plan failed completely, when really, the starting number was simply inaccurate from day one. A disappointing number today beats 6 months of chasing a fantasy that was never realistic. But Joe shouldn't obsess over hitting exactly 165 pounds like it's a sacred number. If he builds muscle throughout the process, he might look lean at a heavier weight entirely. The math is always an estimate, never a guarantee, and never a promise carved in stone. And even perfect math cannot predict vacations, illness, stressful weeks, or unexpected life events completely. On paper, Joe's diet might take 5 months, but real life could stretch it to 7. And that does not mean Joe failed, it simply means Joe is living an actual human life. Say Joe takes 2 weeks off during a vacation, eating at maintenance instead of the deficit. He might temporarily stop losing fat, but he hasn't erased months of hard-earned progress at all. A maintenance break can actually reduce diet fatigue and give him fresh mental energy to continue strong. The real danger was never one indulgent meal, it's the all-or-nothing reaction that usually follows it. People overeat once, declare the entire week ruined, and postpone restarting until some imaginary Monday deadline. Joe needs a simpler rule instead: return to normal at his very next meal, immediately. No punishment, no starvation, no emergency cardio session, just quietly resuming the plan like nothing happened.
He should build flexibility into his timeline from day one, not treat one date as sacred. Progress is never a straight line. Some weeks fly by fast, other weeks feel painfully slow. Consistency was never about being perfect daily. It's about recovering quickly whenever life inevitably gets messy. To know if he's truly progressing, Joe must track more than just one single number obsessively. He should never judge progress from one morning weigh-in, because weight fluctuates wildly for many reasons: water retention, sodium, carbs, digestion, stress, and sleep can all shift the scale overnight completely. A temporary increase does not automatically mean Joe gained fat overnight, so he shouldn't panic instantly. Instead, weigh consistently under similar conditions, then calculate his weekly average instead of daily numbers. Comparing weekly averages reveals the real trend far better than reacting emotionally to yesterday's single number. But the scale is only one piece of a much bigger puzzle Joe needs to solve. Measure the waist every 1 to 2 weeks, take photos in consistent lighting and the same pose, track how clothes fit, and record actual performance numbers happening inside the gym every session. If weight stays stable while the waist shrinks and strength improves, recomposition is quietly happening beneath the surface. So when should Joe actually adjust his plan instead of just waiting patiently through it? Not after 2 slow days, not after one salty restaurant meal, and not after one hard workout. Only adjust when both his weekly average and waist measurements stay unchanged for 2 full weeks. And only if he's honestly followed the plan without secretly cheating or underestimating what he actually ate. This prevents the most common mistake of all: cutting calories because of normal water fluctuations. The goal is responding to real trends, not emotional reactions to a single bad morning. Tracking correctly turns a confusing, frustrating journey into a clear, measurable, and genuinely trustworthy process. But even perfect tracking cannot make stubborn belly fat disappear overnight through sheer willpower alone. To finish this journey, Joe needs something no calculator, app, or spreadsheet can ever provide him: patience. The hardest part of this entire transformation isn't counting calories or finishing tough workouts. It's accepting that his body will change slower than he desperately wants it to. As Joe gets leaner, his face and arms might visibly slim down first, noticeably and quickly. But stubborn fat around his lower belly might refuse to budge for several more weeks. This does not mean the plan stopped working. Genetics simply decide where fat disappears last. This is the exact stage where dangerous comparison creeps in and quietly destroys motivation completely. Joe might compare himself to an influencer with 10 years of training and feel instantly defeated. But he's comparing his first chapter to someone else's already finished, polished, and edited story. The better comparison is always Joe today versus Joe on the very first day he started. Is his waist smaller? Is he stronger? Do his clothes fit noticeably better than before now? These quiet improvements prove transformation is already happening, long before visible abs ever show up. Reaching 15% body fat was never a race against time or against other people. Rushing leads to muscle loss, exhaustion, and often regaining every single pound that was lost. This journey was never Joe against social media. It was always Joe against yesterday's version of himself. And if he keeps improving, even slowly, time eventually reveals what his daily habits were quietly building. Joe's journey isn't difficult because his body is broken or fundamentally different from everyone else's. It's difficult because he's still learning exactly how his own unique body actually responds to changes.
At first, he won't know his ideal calorie intake or which foods keep him satisfied longest. He'll panic when the scale rises, not realizing sodium or stress cause temporary water weight gain. He has to learn how to navigate restaurants, holidays, and one bad meal without spiraling completely out. Most importantly, he has to learn how quickly he can bounce back after making a mistake. These skills aren't learned from reading one diet plan once and expecting instant lifelong mastery. They're built through weeks of practice, trial, small failures, and quiet, unglamorous consistency behind the scenes. Each hard week teaches Joe something new about food, portions, cravings, and staying consistent without motivation. Success was never about being perfect. It was always about recovering quickly after every single setback. The first time reaching 15% feels confusing and unfamiliar, but experience makes it repeatable forever. Joe isn't just losing fat here, he's learning how to stay lean for the rest of his life. So how long will this actually take if we're being completely honest about the real answer? If his starting estimate is accurate, and he protects his muscle every single week consistently, the real math says 16 to 24 weeks, or 4 to 5.5 months total. But real life rarely follows perfect math. Vacations and stressful weeks always extend the true timeline. For most people, 5 to 7 months is the realistic range, not the 4 weeks promised online. If Joe is actually closer to 30% or loses muscle through crash dieting, expect even longer. But if he trains smart, eats enough protein, sleeps well, and builds muscle as a beginner, his physique could improve dramatically before the scale even reaches his originally predicted target number at all. The lesson here is simple. Never rush this process, and never compare your timeline to anyone else's. Compare your waist, your strength, your habits, and your photos only to where you personally started. Your goal was never simply becoming lighter, it was always becoming leaner, stronger, and able to maintain it. So here's the real question you need to honestly answer for yourself, right now, today. What is your actual current body fat percentage, and how many months are you truly willing to invest?